in Des Moines, Iowa, and we are Iowa's first employee assistance program and provide a variety of services you can learn more about at www.efr.org. I'm here today with my colleague, Jen Perez, who has been on the podcast in the past, but today we're doing a switcheroo. She's interviewing me. So I am going to be the guest of the podcast today. My name is Johanna Dunlevy, and I think a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with who I am, but Jen had this idea once that she shared in the break room to have me as the guest, and she is the host. And so here we are. Jen, take it away.
Here we are. Thank you. I'm so excited to be able to do this. And so everybody, that is listening to the podcast can hear, who you are behind the microphone. Tell us a little bit about your role here at EFR.
Yeah, so I've been at EFR since the summer of 2015, and I am the wellness and marketing manager. So I started as the wellness manager, and I think my story about how I got to EFR is interesting. I was working at Drake University full time. I'd been there about close to 8 years, and I was kind of starting to get a little restless. And so towards, I think, year 6 of my tenure at Drake, I started my own business. It was called Hello Wellness, LLC. And it was just kind of a way to keep me, engaged in other types of wellness networks. And so one thing that I did with Hello Wellness was I presented at conferences and for employer groups. And so I was presenting at a conference for the Davis Brown Law Firm, and there was a woman in the audience who sent me a message on LinkedIn. Her name's Ketsi Wilkins, and she, at the time, was a business development director at EFR, and she asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee, and so we went to Mars Cafe, and we chatted, and I just thought it was kind of a, get to know you, networking, and then at the end, she said, well, we have a job opening at EFR for our wellness manager. Do you know anyone who'd be interested? And I said, well, I would be interested. So that's how I ended up here. It was just kind of by way of my own business. And that was 2015. And so once I started at EFR as a wellness manager, I actually kind of put my business to rest because what I had been doing as part of Hello Wellness was essentially what I've been hired to do at EFR. So left Drake, put Hello Wellness aside, and then I've been at EFR since 2015. In 2019, I was given the opportunity to take on some additional roles and responsibilities as our marketing manager. And so that is how I ended up the wellness and marketing manager. And so while wellness is my primary, and I guess you'd say, like, area of expertise and background, that's what I went to school for. That's what I went to college for. I have this opportunity to be the marketing manager as well. So it's been fun and interesting and keeps me busy.
Yeah, I like that. I didn't know all those things about you. So here I am learning more and more about you each day. So with that being said, I know you've done a lot of podcasts, for EFR. Like, what are your favorite podcasts or like your favorite conversations you've had within the podcast?
Sure. So I started the podcast. I got the idea for the podcast when I was listening to other podcasts. So I've always been kind of a late adopter to things. So I didn't start listening to podcasts till like 2019, which I consider kind of pretty late in the game. But they are much more common and popular here. And now we're at the end of 2024. But I would consider myself a bit of a late adopter with the podcast thing. And so I would just go for walks in the Skywalk. So for those of you who don't know, we're located in downtown Des Moines, and we have this wonderful Skywalk system. So you can go for walks no matter what the temperature is outside. So I would go for walks. And I was at the time listening to a podcast that was offered by our partner, Be Better Health. They no longer exist, but they were our wellness partner many years ago. And they had a podcast, and it was about health and well-being. And I just thought it was really interesting, and I enjoyed listening to it. And so I thought, maybe I could do that. Maybe I could have those types of conversations. And so I brought the idea to my leader. She took it to Tammy, the CEO, and it was green lighted. And that's how the podcast came to be. And it launched in January of 2020. And we've done 56 episodes. So I think this one is our 57th. But So the podcast timing was kind of interesting because we started right before the pandemic. And then while it feels like a long time ago, I think those kind of memories of what work was like are still very like fresh for people. Like we all went home. None of us had ever worked from home. I was like, what's going to happen to the podcast? Because I think we'd released, January, February, March episodes. And so at the time, my producer, her name was Gabby. She was on the marketing team. We would call each other and be like, what are we going to do? How can we do this? And we did have some in the bank, like we'd recorded some pre-pandemic. And so we kind of had some that we could release. And so she was able to figure out a way to get those pushed out during the pandemic. And then we eventually came back to the office on a part-time basis. And so there wasn't really that much of a lull. But to answer your question, because I haven't answered it yet, I think the thing I've enjoyed the most and learned the most about doing this podcast is that everyone has a story and
Yes.
everyone has something to share. And we are more, similar than we are different.
Mhm.
And I did prepare by jotting down, some of my favorite episodes because there have been so many. And I went through and I looked. You can go to our website and you can see all of the episodes. And I think there's just so many good ones. So one of the first ones we did was with our colleague Haley Peterson. And I know, Jen, you've listened to like every episode of the
I
podcast.
have.
Jen is a fan girl. So Haley has a daughter that's just a couple of years younger than my daughter, and she was very transparent about her postpartum experience. And so she did an episode about postpartum OCD. And I think there's a lot of stigma around any kind of postpartum mental health issue that a woman goes through, or a father. A father can have postpartum mental health issues as well. But I don't think many people think postpartum OCD. When they think of postpartum mental health, they think of more of like the postpartum depression. And so I just thought that conversation was fascinating because I learned so much from it. And here she is, a woman that I work with that at the time, because her daughter was born pre-pandemic, so we would see each other in the office quite often back when we were here 5 days a week. You just don't know what's going on in someone's life, and it's so easy to go up to someone and say, oh, how's your baby? I bet you love it. Isn't it great? And no, it's not for everyone,
Mhm.
and so that's what I loved about that episode. There was another episode with a gal who I've known most of my life. She's from my hometown. Her name's Destiny Walsh Teixeira, and her brother Andy passed away in 2009. And he struggled with mental health and died by suicide. And so I had for a long time been wanting to reach out to her, but I also didn't really know how to do that.
Mhm.
And I think that just goes to show that even if you know someone and you're comfortable with them, there's still kind of that stigma or that hard conversation around, you know, the loss of the brother by suicide. And so I reached out to her. It was, I think, a Facebook message, and I was kind of nervous to send it, but her response, it was interesting. It was, I'm so glad you reached out. I've been thinking a lot about what I can do to help share his story and get that message out there. And I think this could be the perfect opportunity. So I felt like that was, kind of the universe coming together. Like she really did want to share something, about her brother, and it was about his life, more than his death. And I think that that's what's really important about that episode. And I'm just really glad we had an opportunity to talk and connect because, again, like someone I've known most of my life, you don't always kind of get vulnerable with those people. And so
Mhm.
I thought that was really interesting. We had Dr. Lauren Welter on about emotional abuse, which is our number one most listened to episode. And that one is almost 2 years old now, but she's a psychologist out of the Iowa City area, and I know her. She's a friend of mine, and she was just again very candid and transparent about what emotional abuse is and how her life has been affected by it. And so I think the theme here, as you're
Mhm.
maybe noticing, is that we all have a story, and again, you just never know what's going on in someone's life. Whether it's you've lost a sibling, you've experienced some kind of domestic violence, you have your own mental health journey that people, whether they know about it or not, it's a journey. And I think the more we can talk about these things, the more we can help each other. And I think podcasting and listening to podcasts is a way that people can do that. And then the last episode that I think was probably the most helpful to me as a person was when we had Buffy Peters from Hamilton's funeral home. So she was on and she talked about grief. And so my dad passed away in December of 2021, and we recorded with Buffy, I think October of 2022. And so I was kind of approaching that 1 year anniversary mark and the holidays of my dad's death. And I think the thing that was really helpful about that episode for me was that I kind of logicked my way through my dad's passing, like, because I understand that there's these stages of grief that we will
Right.
experience. I remember shortly after he died, like I was in the shower and I was having one of those, I was bargaining, like, gosh, if we just wouldn't have had that surgery. My dad died after complications of a pretty minor surgical procedure. He ended up getting sepsis and passed away. But I remember just going like, oh, what if we would have overslept that day and he never would have gone to the hospital? And then maybe the circumstances would have been different. And it could have been, a different doctor, or we never would have had the surgery at all. And then I remember in the shower being like, oh, you're bargaining, Johanna. That's okay. This is normal. Just keep bargaining. You're going to go to the next stage. And so I struggled with that for a long time. And then when we had Buffy on, she talked about how grief is not linear. And you're going to go through phases or stages of grief, maybe not in the order that they're presented. And you might go in order, but you might go back and forward and back and forward. And so I thought that was really interesting and helpful. And then my best friend passed away just over a year ago. And that was a very different kind of grief and loss for me. In full transparency, much, much more difficult than losing my dad. And I'm just glad I had that conversation with Buffy because
Yeah.
because now it makes me understand more about what I'm experiencing as a person who's grieving. And I haven't been logicking my way through that loss. And I think that's been really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Those are all important factors. When I listen to the podcast myself, I can relate something from my life to almost every single podcast I've heard within EFR. And if it's being heard and listened by me, others are wanting to listen to it as well.
Sure.
So I just think it's so important. This podcast is important. Go back to, I wasn't a big podcaster either until I started working at EFR. And now I'm like, all right, like I'm venturing out, outside of our EFR podcast and, listening to some other podcasts. So
Yeah, what do you listen to? What do you listen to?
I listen to New Heights with the Kelsey brothers.
Yes.
And
You're not a
then
Chiefs fan. Let's just make that be known. Jen is
yes,
not a Chiefs fan.
I'm not a Chiefs fan. I'm sorry. And then I listen to some crime podcasts. And that's kind of my podcast I listen to. I know it's one array to the next array.
Sure. Did you listen to the Serial podcast many, many years ago about Adnan Syed, who was convicted of murdering his girlfriend in high school?
I did not.
So that was the very first podcast I ever listened to, and that was 2014. And I think I listened to it kind of toward not the end of its popularity, but I wasn't like the first person listening to it, as a recommendation, but that was the first podcast I ever listened to. And I think if you like true crime, you'd really like that one. And they've actually made, documentaries about that case. It's a case that dates back to 1999. So a long, long time ago. But the thing I enjoyed about that podcast was, I was a peer in terms of age with these people. So I graduated from high school in 2000 and these people graduated in the late 90s. And they're asking, in 2014, like this, they're asking this guy what he was doing at a certain date and time in 1999. Can you remember what you were doing? I mean, it just, there's so much about that podcast that is interesting and kind of infuriating in terms of kind of the criminal justice system. But that was the first podcast I ever listened to. And then I took a break for a few years. And when I became a mom, I started listening to a lot of mom podcasts. One of my favorites was called Mom Brain, but they don't have it anymore. But I think that ran for like 3 seasons. But I loved that podcast. And here I am. Now I I have one,
And now,
as do many people. It's no longer, there are a lot of podcasts out there. It's kind of like, everyone is doing it. But like you said, I think if you find one that you love and enjoy, it is really a treat to have
it
a new
is.
episode drop. So
It is. So we work within the EAP, space with our work we do every day. Have you used your EAP benefit before?
yeah, I certainly have. Okay, so prior to working at EFR, I didn't really understand how helpful an EAP benefit could be. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say this because I've been a wellness professional, now for 20 years. And when I came to EFR, I'd been a wellness professional for about 11. But so, like, for example, when I worked at Drake has our EAP, if I can say
Mhm.
that. I never referred anyone to it. And I was in the wellness center and people were talking to me about things that weren't necessarily related to mental health, but there's certainly a dotted line between struggling to motivate to exercise or making good food choices to, maybe mental health or lack of motivation or things that were outside my scope of practice. So that'd be the one thing I would do differently if I could go back to my days at Drake. I would have promoted our benefit more. But yeah, I've used the EAP benefit. I've used the counseling. I'm in counseling. I see a counselor on a regular basis, and I have for almost 6 years. And when I say regular basis, anywhere from, well, it's usually twice a month,
Mhm.
sometimes more, sometimes less, just kind of depending on what's going on. But, EAP counseling was my first experience with a counselor. And I was going through some big changes in 2015 with relationships and career. And so, yeah, I've used the counseling, I've used our life coaching, and I've used our legal consultation benefit. So I've used those three, and it was so easy, so
Yeah.
easy to use them. And I think that maybe is a misconception about EAP benefits. It's like, what am I going to have to do to use this? Well, you have to call an 800 number with ours. With EFR's
Right.
EAP, you call an 800 number. And, the phone counselor kind of takes it from there. So, yes, I've used the benefit and I'm not afraid to say that. And I think there's still a lot of stigma around reaching out for help, whether it's you have a legal question or you need to see a counselor. But my hope is that this podcast helps break down that barrier and reduces the stigma. And I think another reason people sometimes don't use the benefit is they just don't know that it exists. They
Right.
aren't aware, or they think maybe it's for a crisis only. And
Mhm.
we can be there, and we are there for our clients in crises. But, for individuals, we certainly want to help them prevent those crises by being proactive and reaching out before things kind of get that far down the road.
Yeah. Agree. I haven't had the opportunity to use the EAP. I did work for a company that did have the EAP benefit, and I had no idea. So I just had a call around to get a counselor and seek out my services myself. But it is a very easy process. Just call the 800 number. It's easy. It's very interesting just kind of hear how intertwined you are with community. Drake is right here, and so I'm sure you have a lot of different trainings that you do. Could you talk about like maybe one of the trainings that you have done?
Sure, like the trainings that I facilitate for EFR.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have our wellness benefit, so we serve businesses and organizations by providing an EAP or an employee assistance program benefit. Some of those organizations invest up a level and they have our EAP plus wellness benefit. And so I manage that book of business in terms of I'm the consultant for those organizations, and I do some service delivery. And one of those deliveries is through trainings. And okay, so this is kind of what's been the most fun about my job at EFR is that I've had so many opportunities to take ideas and run with them. And I would credit that to the two leaders I've had in the time I've been at EFR have both been very supportive leaders. And that is one of the things that I've enjoyed the most about working here is that I've always felt supported by my leader. Um, And so way back in the beginning, when I was first hired, we didn't have that many clients. We didn't have, that many offerings. And so part of my responsibilities were just to build the program. Like, what are we actually selling and delivering? And so I came up with a variety of training topics. And I would say the ones that I train on the most, because they're the most requested, are address your stress, mindfulness matters, and self-care 101. And they're they're my favorite, and I also get really excited when someone picks a different training topic. So other training topics that we have would be like rest for success. So how sleep hygiene can help you feel better, be more productive, be healthier, or unplugged. And that's a training that's about having healthy boundaries with digital devices. And so while those two, and there's many more, but I'm just
Mhm.
listing, I would say like the 5 that I enjoy the most, and the 3 that are the most popular, it's kind of a no-brainer why. I mean, we all experience stress. Mindfulness is kind of a buzzword,
Mhm.
but we all have the
Yeah.
ability to be mindful, and mindfulness and stress are connected, and mindfulness and stress and self-care are connected, and self-care is also very popular. And I think what I like the most about doing those is that I'm not delivering some kind of, profound information to
Mm.
people. I mean,
Right.
most people know what's going to make them feel better and what's going to make them feel lousy, or what's going to increase stress or what's going to decrease stress. So I feel like if I can bring people some simple, tips and tricks to address their stress, then I've done my job. Or, self-care, it doesn't have to be something luxurious. It can be a spa day, but who's going to do a spa day, on the regular?
Yeah.
I mean, no one I know. So self-care can be having 10 minutes to yourself in the morning before work, just on it to put dishes away. How is that self-care? You're focusing on yourself. You don't have distractions. You're getting something done. Sometimes those little household chores can be kind of cathartic in a way. Like, I don't know why, but I love emptying the dishwasher, like
Yeah.
just feels good. But yeah, I mean, self-care can be yoga. It can be going for a walk with a friend, watching a movie, reading a book, journaling, taking a half day, taking a full day. And I just like reminding people that it is within reach.
Mhm.
And when I deliver the self-care presentation, I try to incorporate some of my own life experiences to be relatable, but also because kind of going back to like this idea of the podcast, I think people remember stories more than they remember facts and figures, right? And so, like in the self care presentation, I share this story every time, and it goes back to when my dad passed away. So, my dad had surgery the day after Thanksgiving in 2021. And I went home. My hometown is Lansing, Iowa. It's 4.5 hours from Des Moines. I went home for what I considered a long weekend, Thursday through Sunday. And so my dad's surgery was Friday. On Saturday, my sister and I were told that he was not going to survive, and they were going to, and then we made the choice to take him off life support. And he didn't pass away for another week. And so during that time, and I think people, and I know people can relate to this because the last time I delivered this presentation, someone sent me a message saying, I lost a parent in a very similar way. So, in those 7 days, or it was 8 days, I think, from 9 days from the day of the surgery, I guess. But anyway, in that time frame, I was like, do I stay at the hospital every night? What do I do? Because the hospital was not in the same town my dad lived in. Like there was, 45-minute drive each way. And I tried staying overnight. I think I did one night, and then the next day I was like delirious because I didn't sleep. I felt pretty poor in terms of my physical health. And so I had to make that hard decision. Like I had to pick myself. I had to pick self-care. And so for me, what self-care was leaving the hospital every night to go sleep in a bed at my dad's house. And that was self-care for me. And I knew that the outcome of this situation would be my dad was going to pass away. And I knew that that was going to be extremely challenging. And then if I wasn't taking care of myself in the days leading up to that, I would be even more of a mess than I knew I was already going to be. So I feel like a story like that, whether it's relatable or just makes people go, oh, self-care is not selfish.
Right.
You have to, put your oxygen mask on before you help someone else. And so I think the thing I like the most about trainings is just kind of that, delivering those ideas and hopefully inspiration to people, because I've always been a big believer as a wellness practitioner that it's the small things that make the biggest difference.
I
So,
agree. I mean, when we have our mindful moments here within the EFR office, they are like my favorite days because I know that I'm being forced to have that 15-minute break in my
yeah,
day. And they are kind of my favorite days when I see them pop up and I accept them right away because I'm just like, yes, I know I'm just going to be forced to have that, that 15-minute of just shut off everything and just, you know, come into my own space to relax and then be ready to take on the rest of the day. So those are fun moments. I come from the direct care world before this job, and I had very, very poor self care, and I have come a long ways in my self care of just forcing myself to find time. And also, the biggest thing is saying no to some things that I used to say yes to a lot of like, nope, I'm not doing that. I'm sorry. I'm not. I have to take care of Jen now. And, that's what I'm doing. So I have grown a lot and still continuing to grow with that. With that self-care. So that is a big thing that people say they want to do it, but trying to do it is another thing.
yeah. Well, and if you're listening to this, Jen's episode is called When Helpers Need Help because she is a helper. And I loved your episode because it was, again, just like a candid conversation between two people who work together. But even if we didn't have that working relationship, a candid conversation between two people talking about how hard it is to take care of ourselves. And
Yeah.
um, I appreciate you reaching out to me and asking to be on the podcast for that, because I think it's such an important message, especially in the space that we work in. So we're in a nonprofit human service, space.
Yeah.
Those people tend to extend themselves, right? Maybe
Yep.
to the point where they're not giving back to their own self-care, because we're helpers by nature. And
Yeah.
we're also people at the end of the day with the same needs as the people we're helping. So I think that's just such an important reminder, especially for people listening who are maybe teachers or counselors or healthcare workers, or maybe you don't fit or check any of those boxes professionally, but you just deep down are an empath or you're a helper. So helpers need help.
Helpers do need help. That is 100% true. So you've talked about life experiences. I feel as if my life experiences have shaped who I am. And had I not gone through some of those life experiences, I don't know. I'm not sure I'd be in the field that I was in, that I am in right now. I mean, I wanted to be a flight attendant, and a flight attendant to
Like,
a mental health guru is like night and day of each other. So yeah, I was really focused on being a flight attendant when I was in high school, and then some life experiences happened, and it totally just veered my entire way to becoming a helper and getting into the mental health field. And I can tell, life experiences that, you've talked about your dad has shaped, many things within your life. Any other life experiences that you would like to share, or, have had any impact in, who you are today?
yeah, absolutely. I love that fun fact about you. So we have a snack cart at Drake, or at Drake. Oh my gosh, my head is in the wrong place. We have a snack cart at EFR. And Jen is in charge of the snack cart, which is just a nice monthly delivery of some kind of a snack or just a novelty item. And now I'm envisioning you wheeling the snack cart through the hall.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
can see the flight attendant in you now. I think
Yep.
you should wear a scarf the next time you bring the
Maybe.
snack cart up. Okay. So yes, I think, I don't know, that there's a few things running through my head at the moment. I remember being a preteen and a teen watching the show Friends. So I was 12 when that show came out and 22 when it ended. And you know how when you're younger, you're kind of attracted to shows about a generation, ahead of you. So, and this is, I learned this, like kids enjoy watching shows about kind of, the next level up. So like my daughter who's 7 really likes watching shows about preteens, right?
Yep.
So when I was like a teenager, I really liked watching shows about, young 20 somethings. And I bring this up because I was watching Friends recently, of course, in syndication. And I was like, wait a second, I'm older now. I'm so many years older now than those people were
Mhm.
at the time. And then I started to think about how, I envisioned my life like as a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old being when I was in my 30s. And well, now I'm in my 40s. And so I just think it's interesting how we never know what life events are going to shape us, right? We just
Yep.
have no idea.
100%.
So um you can have the best plans. You can, not take risks or take risks or, you know, check all the boxes or none of the boxes, and you just never know how it's going to turn out. But um, my daughter asked me recently what my favorite age has been. And I said, the age I am now, because I feel like you got to stay, in the present moment. Um, but yeah, I've had a lot of things happen in my life, like everyone has.
Yeah.
I've had relationships that haven't worked out. I've had experiences with, I'm a single parent. I've lost a parent. I've lost a best friend. Um, sometimes those things, like especially the losses and, kind of going back to grief, I think people often mistaken grief for something that's associated with death. And you can grieve a lot of things. You can grieve a relationship, you can grieve a job that you no longer have, a stage of life, a friendship that has, come to pass. And so I think about that, and I think about all the things that I've needed to support myself through changes, because the one guarantee we have in life is change. Well, and
Yep.
the other is death. So you're going to have change and you're going to have death. And I've had a lot of changes in my life, whether they be professional or personal, but I've definitely come in to find that I need support,
Mhm.
right, to get me through changes. And when I was in my 20s and my early 30s, I didn't really ask for help. I thought I could do it all on my own. I thought I was really healthy, and physically I was. I was in really great physical shape because of my age, having no children, kind of all the time I wanted to do whatever I wanted. The job I had was very physically active. All of those things made me very physically well.
Yeah.
And then as life started to happen more and more, and I got divorced, and then I was in a different relationship and had a daughter, and then, experienced challenges in that relationship related to substance use of my partner. Um, and that relationship ending and becoming a single parent. Wow, like I needed a lot of support. And so for me, it was then, okay, the YMCA is not my number one priority on my lunch break anymore. Like maybe a couple days a week, but now I have a counselor and I go to Al-Anon, which for people who don't know what Al-Anon is, it's there's Alcoholics Anonymous for people who identify as alcoholics, and Al-Anon is for people who have been affected by alcoholism, by someone else's drinking. And so I kind of drug my feet, but went to an Al-Anon meeting, and it ended up making such a big difference in my life. So for me, it's going to the YMCA, it's going to Al-Anon, it's going to my counselor, having a life coach. Now, I don't have a life coach at the moment. You don't need all these things all the time, right?
Mhm.
It's kind of about how, as your life changes, what your needs are. And so for me, still talking to my counselor, I still need that. And honestly, I still am a member of Al Anon, and I probably always will be. but it's no longer once or twice a week that I need that kind of support. It might be a couple times a month. And I've made a couple of good friends in the program, and a text here and there makes a big difference. And now, I look at where I am today in 2024 and the relationship I'm in now and where I am with my daughter. And it's like all of those life experiences brought me here. And I believe made me a healthier person, to have this relationship that I'm in now, to be the mom to Audrey that I need to be, to navigate friendships and other family dynamics. And I think that's been kind of how I've ended up in a place where I'm comfortable with this being the favorite part of my life.
Yeah. You know, and it goes to show that, you knew that you needed the extra support in taking that jump and, finding, how to get that support. And sometimes that's really hard for people to get from point A to point B. But sometimes you just have to go from A to B, and then that support is going to help find your needs and help you, get on the road to that extra stuff that that they think that you may need. So, that was very interesting. I shared in my podcast, I went to intense therapy for 2.5 years. And graduated. I say graduated because I thought when I was younger, I graduated in 96 to date myself. Mental health really wasn't a thing back in
Right.
that time frame. And I think about all the things that I endured and went through and did not have, like, nobody really told me about, hey, like, maybe you should do this. I go to my school counselor, talk to my school counselor, but it's like, it's a whole new world. And I do think about, if mental health today was back in 96,
Mm-hmm.
how different would that have shaped my life? I mean, I think about those
Oh, I
things,
think about that a lot too.
and
Like,
I'm
if I
just
would have
like,
started earlier. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's just kind of mind blowing of like, I could have maybe not had some of the hurdles in my life that I did have had I had that support that was non-judgmental, kind of helping push me along the way. So it's just kind of interesting, hearing your life experiences, and some of my life experiences from, the podcast. It's interesting to hear how everybody is different, but in some way, shape, or form, we all kind of are the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there any other fun facts you would like to share, with the listeners?
Well, I don't know. Fun facts. When I was little, I used to pretend I was Oprah and I would interview people. And so maybe that's how I ended up here. And when I say I used to interview people, it was like imaginary, like I was talking as Oprah and then as myself. So I thought about, I had this moment the other day where I thought about, I think I like encountered something about Oprah online, and I was like, oh yeah, I kind of remember like watching her show and like
Mhm.
wanting to be her and asking the hard questions. And so here I am. Yeah, that and some of my favorite podcasts that I listen to. I love Armchair Expert and some of the offshoots of that. So, Armchair Anonymous and Flightless Bird, Stuff You Should Know, the Life Kit podcast. There's one called Divorce Survival Guide. And I kind of wish that podcast had a different name, because the host talks about a lot of really great topics, and it's related to relationships, but not everyone gets divorced, or not everyone has been divorced or is getting divorced. And so whenever I recommend that podcast to people, I'm like, but don't let the word divorce, divorce survival guide turn you away, because you don't have to be going through a divorce or have been there or want to go there to find this podcast helpful. She talks a lot about like narcissistic personality disorder, navigating co-parenting, finding your self-worth, identifying what works for your self-care, like so many episodes. And again, not necessarily pigeonholed to people, to divorcees per se. But yeah, I would say Armchair Expert is my favorite. It's a really great combo of uh, it's enlightening, it's informational, it's entertaining. Sometimes it just feels like you're hanging out with friends. You're like listening to, this conversation between people. And I've gotten a lot of good book recommendations from that podcast. So yeah, I would say that's, if I were to give people some recommendations, it would be Armchair Expert and all of the little offshoots of that, and Divorce Survival Guide.
Those are great. I'm going to have to go and like look into some of those. Um, Johanna, it's been awesome. Flipping roles, and being able to, to do this with you. Again, you talk about how ideas pop up and we talk to, higher ups of like, can we do this? And it just goes to show, I just threw this out there and said, hey, let's try this. And, let's let people see who the person is behind the mic. So I appreciate your time today. And hope everybody has a great day.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking me to be the guest. And just for anyone listening, a lot of our guests have come from, they've connected with me on LinkedIn, or they've listened to a podcast, to the Emotion Well podcast, and they've said, hey, can I be a guest? And so if you are listening and you want to share something, the podcast is called Emotion Well, and everything is meant to be, tied back to emotional health and well-being that we cover. And really, when you think about it, it's not hard to make a connection between any life experience and your emotional health. So if you're listening and you want to be a guest in 2025, I would love to have you. I will include my LinkedIn profile in the show notes, and you can send me a message there and we can get a recording set up. So thank you so much, Jen.
You bet. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Emotion Well. Employee and Family Resources, or EFR, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization located in Des Moines, Iowa. We support communities, workplaces, and schools with comprehensive behavioral health services. If you would like to contribute to our mission, please click on the donation link in our show notes.